Alright, hello everybody. Welcome back. This is going to be part two of making clay from my yard. And it's been a few days. And this step of the process, separating the water out, you really can wait quite some time. And you're just going to have less, liquid water in your clay. But I think this is, well, I'm hoping that this is dry enough that I can move on to the next step. So the first thing I'm going to do here is just get as much of this liquid water off the top as I can. I'm going to be using a small piece of plastic hose and just siphoning that out. So it shouldn't take too long. If I waited another few weeks or a month, the clay that was at the bottom underneath the water would be pretty close to being ready to use, almost like it was when it was taken out of the ground in the first place, except for that it wouldn't have any, organic matter or rocks, gravel, sand in it. And when I did my first test of this last year, I did some in the fall, and I waited until towards the end of winter so 3 months probably. And at that point, once I took the water off the top of the clay, I had pretty much usable clay at the bottom. It didn't take very long at all to get it to, dry and thicken up to a usable level. So this clay I'm expecting is going to be, not quite at that point. Starting to suck in a little bit of clay there. That's okay. I don't know, I could be wrong here. Maybe I do need to wait longer, but we'll see. So next step is going to be to take some of this, what's still slurry, and put that here onto my wedging table. This is just a small wedging table that I made myself. Just a wooden frame. It's got some short legs, so I can put it on a bench or use it on the ground if I want to. The surface is plaster of Paris. It's about 2 inches thick, and it's reinforced with a few layers of chicken wire, and I drove screws in all the way around the interior of this frame, so the heads of the screws are actually embedded in that plaster, and then I reinforced the bottom with some wood after it had dried. So this thing's quite tough. This is pretty small for a wedging table that's going to be used to actually manufacture clay, but plaster of Paris isn't cheap, and I really wanted to just do this at a small scale to begin with. So anyway, I can tell if this is really watery. I'm not really sure how well this is going to work today. So the plaster surface of this table is going to just suck the water right out of this slurry pretty quickly. It is pretty humid, and this table is stored in my basement, so I'm not sure how dry it actually is, but normally that plaster is going to be so dry that, like I say, it just sucks the moisture right out of the slurry, and you get a usable clay pretty quick. I would like this to be a little bit thicker, but I actually think this is going to work out okay for the purposes of this demonstration. Just want to make sure it's all getting, just onto the plaster surface. I don't want any going out to the edge of the frame. The surface of this is quite level, and I know that my bench here is also quite level. If there was even a slight angle here, this mixture is so thin that it would just roll right off. But it seems to be staying on here pretty well. At this point, most of whatever really fine sand or organic matter that may have made it through that screen should have settled to the bottom of the bucket by now. I can see a little bit of really fine black sand in this. So that is telling me that it probably hasn't sat long enough. But again, this is really just a experiment. I'm just trying to find out, what the quality of this clay really is. I'll probably try to find someone else to fire some for me, someone with a little bit more experience, and see what they think. I mentioned in the last video that I do have a small kiln that I'll be setting up here in the shop, and I'll do a video on that coming up soon. The actual placing it and wiring it and all that stuff. So that might be kind of interesting to some people. So I can actually see the clay beginning to dry along the edges here. So even though this is quite wet, I think that my table is dry enough that this really isn't going to take very long. I'll leave this sit for a while and I'll come back. You'll see, but I'll start to roll this over and get it to an even consistency and even dryness. Alright, so it's only been about a half an hour. This is a very thin layer. It really should be quite a bit thicker than that, and then it would take longer. But I think that this is pretty much ready. Oh yeah. To start being worked a little bit further. I'm going to try to just clump this together to begin with. If this was heavier, I could probably just peel this layer right up by hand. This is so thin that I don't think it has enough structure. You know what? Suppose I was wrong. Still quite sticky. It is pretty hard to get it to lift. I get as much as I can off the tools here. I always wash this right back into one of my containers and have it for the next batch. Alright, so now this is getting to a consistency that I can start to wedging. Which I'm not overly good at. But this is just the process where you kind of get the air bubbles out of the clay. In this case, with raw clay like this, it's also where you're kind of working the moisture out. As you can see, I'm starting to get to the point where I'm picking up all the leftover bits off of the table. Starting to get to the you know, consistency that clay should be at for working with. I don't know if I mentioned, but this is from the sample that I was saying was going to be better. I'm hoping that's true. Alright, well, now this is to a point where I would say this is pretty usable clay here. My intent for this stuff, as I mentioned all the way back in the beginning, is to try to make bonsai pots out of this clay, fire it myself. But the next thing I need to do is get some of this out to somebody that knows a bit more about clay and how to fire it and how to work it than I do myself, and see what kind of feedback I get from it, see if it's really even usable. But it sure seems to be to me. But again, I'm no expert on clay. So I'm going to put that away, clean off the tabletop, and then I'm going to put a bit of the other clay, the other sample of clay onto here, and see how that turns out. So now I'm just going to wrap this up in a nice clean piece of plastic, so it doesn't lose any more moisture. I think it's at a pretty good level right now. Again, I'm not real experienced, so I don't know that for sure. But I think this is pretty much at the consistency that you want to start working it, doing something with it. I'll tape that closed when I'm done. Next thing I'm going to do is just try to scrape off as much of this clay from the previous sample. Anything that's left will just end up getting, absorbed into the next batch of clay that I put on here. And it is very similar, so I don't think that thin layer is going to make any kind of impact on my test. I'll just throw this back in one of my buckets. Alright, so now I'm on to what is the second sample, which is just the clay that was from further up. In the hole that I kind of said from the beginning, I suspected was going to be the lower quality clay. Do the same thing. Just pour some of it out onto the table. This may take a bit longer because I'm doing this pretty much right after I remove the first sample from the table. So the moisture content of the plaster is probably quite a bit higher than it was when I started with the first one. But it still shouldn't take very long. Assuming this is going to be pretty similar to the original test that I did with this stuff. Insect. I haven't kept these buckets closed, but I did fasten the mesh back over the top just to keep, dirt and bugs and things from getting into the clay. I think that's getting pretty close to the limit of what I can put on here, just because of how thin it is. It's really thinner than what's ideal in my mind anyway. But same deal. I'm going to let this sit for half hour to an hour, and then I'll bring it back and wedge it up like I did with the first sample. Alright, so here we go. This is the second batch that I put out on the wedging table here. This is the batch of clay that's from the upper level of the ground here, the upper level of the hole that I dug, and I have left this sit a bit longer than the last batch, and as you can see, it's coming off a whole lot cleaner. It's not really that much drier to the touch, but yeah, see? But it's coming off of the table a lot cleaner, whatever that means. So, seems like I'm still going to get my hands pretty dirty here. Just going to go ahead and start kind of wedging that up. I'm not overly experienced, or not very well experienced at all with using clay outside of my elementary school days. But I've watched a few videos and I think I have the basic idea down. I'll be seeking some more advice, but my main goal right now is to find out whether I have clay here on my property that I'm going to be able to use to make pots, because I think that would be really cool. If not, I still have the kiln, and maybe I'll have to buy clay from somewhere else and use that. But in the meantime, it's pretty fun to do. And maybe I have something here that I can actually use. So I've kind of been rushing this whole process. I wasn't so hasty on peeling this batch up as I was the last one, but just in general, I didn't really let it sit long enough in the bucket, but I really just want to find out whether it's even worth my time to go through all this. You know, not all clay, to my understanding, is worthwhile for making ceramics. You know, maybe it could serve some other purpose if it's not good enough for that, but my hope is that this is, at least one of these are decent quality clay that can be used to make something with. I know here in the Hudson Valley where I am, we were famous for our brick clay, and there's a lot of stoneware that's made in the area. So I'm hopeful that there's some kind of decent clay here on my own property. I'm going to wedge this out a little bit more, just kind of dry it out. Alright, well, this is going to conclude this portion of this series. I think this is a little wet, but the humidity is so high right now, and this table's already been used once today. It doesn't seem to be really drying out anymore, but I don't want to leave this clay sit overnight, so I'm just going to kind of cube it up and wrap it in plastic, the same I did as the same that I did with the last piece, which is this one here. This one's a little bit bigger. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. I certainly am learning from this experience myself. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.